Welcome to my review of Rygar for the Lynx. And yeah, I haven't played a lot of really great Lynx games, but this was quite a good one. I was impressed with this game. I really, not that I was impressed with the visuals or anything like that, but it was just a cool game. It was like, wow, this is a fun game for the system. It's cool to discover games on different systems. Of course, I discover so many games now through emulation. So, I have a PC focused purely on emulating old games. And when I say old, I mean, from pretty much the Wii U and down to the earliest systems. So it covers most of gaming history. It's a pretty extensive machine. So this game, I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it because I played through the arcade version, which I believe I did a tutorial on the channel, and I'm not sure if I made a tutorial for this version. I may have. If I did, then I'll have a link in the description. But this is very similar to the arcade version, the way it plays, which is impressive for the Lynx. It is more zoomed in. That's one of the main differences. Now, of course, the arcade game is kind of primitive to begin with, so it's not like it was a huge fucking feat of strength or something that the developer did to get this on the console. But it was cool to see, such a solid game ported so well to the console. And if you're not familiar with this game, it's a pretty damn straightforward and linear action game where you pretty much are usually either moving right or up. So yeah, there's not a lot to it in that sense, but it's a challenging game. They're all pretty challenging. The arcade version was hard. This version I think was quite difficult if I remember right. It's hard to remember because I beat several ports of this game on various consoles, and some of them were much harder than others. But I remember this being pretty challenging from what I remember. And if I did make a tutorial for this, then my completion time will be listed in the description of that tutorial. So if you're interested, that information will be there. I'll have to check to see if I did make a tutorial for this port. Since I beat, other versions of this game, it's hard to remember. But the basics of the game are you just basically either move right or up. And you're just killing enemies as you move forward. The idea is to just, try to get to the end of the stages. You don't even have to kill most of the enemies if you don't want to. You just kill whatever you need to get through to the other side. So if there's shit in your way, you want to clear it out. You can try playing careful and slow for certain levels, and that can help a lot. But if you know a stage, you can really jet through the stages, and you can actually bounce off of enemies' heads. You can pretty much bounce off every enemy in the game, and it won't hurt you. And you'll get these really high bounces, so you can kind of bounce through the stages if you know what you're doing. It's hard to improvise in the moment on the Lynx because the screen is so zoomed in on this version. You don't have as much room to react when enemies appear on the screen, so that is a limitation of the console. Playing on a 65-inch screen TV probably did help to some degree. At least everything was big. But, it doesn't help with the zoomed-in nature of the game. But still, it plays quite well, and you do adjust to that. But you do have to learn the stages. At certain parts, it can get tricky to just try to improvise. And, some parts kind of require you to move faster, from what I remember. But yeah, it's a very simple, the concept is very simple, but it presents a nice challenge. Good soundtrack from what I remember, just like the arcade. And a lot of people are going to be familiar with Rygar through the NES version, which is a completely different game than this and the arcade version. NES had a lot of games that totally, when they made home versions of the arcade games, they made them in completely different games, like Double Dragon 1, 2, and 3 were completely different games than the arcade versions on the NES. And of course, some games were emulating the arcade style, like Gyrus. Gyrus was very similar to the arcade version, but it added bosses, which the arcade version didn't have. So some of them are like improved versions of the arcade games. Even though the graphics weren't as good, they added new features, or they just had tighter gameplay, like Contra for the NES. I believe it has extra content too, but it also just plays much better. And I actually like the cleaner graphics of the NES, even though they're not as technically impressive over the arcade. But that's another issue. But Yeah, this is based off of the arcade version of Rygar, which is a very different game than the NES one. The NES one's more of an adventure game where you can, it's like what people call Metroidvania these days, where you got to collect items to get to access new areas, and you got to explore and things like that. It's more in that style, and it's a pretty good game for that type of game. I played through it on the channel as well. I don't think I did a tutorial on it, though, because it's one of those games where I didn't really know what the fuck I was doing. I was following a fucking guide to beat it because it's a very cryptic game, so there's really no sense in me making a guide, especially since the guide I was following, is much better than what I would have made on it, because I'm not really into, exploration type of games, like making guides and shit for that kind of stuff. I like making tutorials on gameplay and different strategies, like twitchy kind of gameplay and action games. And, strategies like that, I like. But yeah, one thing I like this game better than the NES one because I'm not into navigation. So for me, this would be my preferred version. I like the straightforward action of this in the arcade version and the other ports of this game on home consoles that are good at least. So I think this is, I do enjoy the arcade version definitely more than the NES one. But I like that the NES games tried to do something different. I mean, there's 1,000 games, on emulation, it's like I can appreciate the fact that, a lot of times games with the same name were completely different games on different systems. Like you look at Sparkster for the Genesis and then Sparkster for Super Nintendo. Same name, completely different games, but using the same character and the same, type of gameplay. But totally different stages and bosses and everything. So I like that kind of shit because if I wanted to play the same game, I can just play the originals, So I like the variety. Now, of course, this is just trying to emulate the arcade, but it does a good job. And, I like that the ports are not completely faithful to the arcade because, like I said, when I play it, it's a different experience than if I just played the arcade version again and again. It's something different. Maybe it's not as good. Maybe it lacks certain things, or maybe it does certain things better, but it's kind of cool just to experience a different version of a game. So I actually like that kind of shit. But yeah, very solid game. If you like action games and just if you like just kind of straightforward action that gets to the point and presents like a nice challenge, then you'll like this. I believe this game has unlimited continues, if I remember right. I don't think it's the kind of game that you have to master unlimited continues, but when you do use a continue, I think it can start you back quite a bit. I mean, you'll go back several stages. The stages are generally pretty short, as you can see. You saw some bits and pieces of them, but the stages are usually pretty short. They might only be like a minute long or something like that. They're not long stages. And of course, they could be probably like 30 seconds if you run through them, if you know the stages, once you learn them. So when you do get sent back, and if you learn a stage, you can kind of bolt back to where you were. So it's not too bad, even though you might get sent back 4 or 5 stages. But like I said, they're small stages. So it keeps it challenging. So for me, I would give this game a 7 out of 10. I think it's quite a solid action game. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.